And I think that there are certain people who are born with the ability to see through barriers, or maybe they've experienced it so early in their lifetime that they don't even realize they've overcome that at a very early age. I'll say for myself, it took me being around other people that thought that way, to kind of push me to do to think in a similar way. And I will also say that uh, it comes from exercising a muscle that most people don't even know they have. And that muscle is constantly, voluntarily pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and not just doing something that you're comfortable with, not just doing the thing that you know again and again, but really thinking about like, what am I going to learn, or what do I really want to learn out of this experience, or what do I want to do in the long run?
We created this podcast with the idea that we were going to create a platform that would help entrepreneurs who maybe come from non-traditional backgrounds, help them get more exposure to their brand, their business, their mission. And so it's been a great ride.
Hello and welcome to the Underestimated Podcast. My name is Rodell Razor. I'm the CEO of X Factor Capital, joined here with my business partner, Jeremiah. And we want to thank you guys for joining us. We have an exciting show today, a good friend that we'll get into here in a second. But I always want to start by thanking our viewers and then also thanking our sponsors who make all of this possible. But if you're interested in startups, venture capital, anything entrepreneurship, investing, angel investing, this podcast is for you. So we thank you for coming on this ride, and business partner, Jeremiah Captain.
Yeah, excited to be here. Jeremiah Captain, Oakland, California. Go Warriors. Always having the championship mindset, so I want to give him a shout out. And I have a good friend of mine, Will Drewery, that's out of the Bay Area right now, but from Pittsburgh. And we actually met, I think it's been about 3 or 4 years now, maybe a little bit longer than that. And I was actually at a Barnes and Nobles, and I saw this family come by with me and their kids, and they start playing with my kids. And there was Javarius that we're actually, friends of. And he introduced us, and he told me about Will sitting on the board of this nonprofit in San Francisco, California, called Old School Cafe. Shout out to Teresa Gowans.
Okay,
that's how the
cool.
connection happened.
Cool.
And we went to one of their events where they were doing a fundraiser, and we officially connected there even deeper after the first time we met. And, there's some people you just meet and you just know they're like-minded, like valued, but also like grounded. And it's been a great connection since I've known him. So I'm excited to have him on the show. So Will, kind of tell us a little bit about, who you are, what do you do? And then the last thing, why do you do what you do?
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. It's just really a pleasure to connect with you on this, on the podcast. First, just, thank you to Jeremiah. I think it was at least 5 years ago when we met each other. And, I will say that you're one of these guys that just, when you speak, you capture the room. And I was like, there's something about this brother. He's just like, you got a real calling on your career and on your relationships. I started my career in management consulting out of the Washington, D.C. area. Spent some time working for different government agencies. And at one point, I found myself working on a project in Baghdad, Iraq, of all places. And one of the things that we were doing there was a factory redevelopment project with a number of state-owned factories. They made everything from drugs and medical supplies to leather, fertilizer, cement. Overall, we ended up working with like 15 different factories. And we were helping them get manufacturing equipment, raw materials, all sorts of things that they needed to just restart their operations. And that for me was just so meaningful. As a kid that grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with the exodus of the steel industry, I was very familiar with the kind of economic disenfranchisement that comes from that. So being able to be a part of a redevelopment program like that, and to see the immediate impacts that were made by just increasing productivity and being able to for the people to be productive, for the products that those factories made to power the local economy, was just a very powerful thing for me. And I would say that was really a transformative experience for me, and really the thing that set the trajectory for the rest of my career, lighting this fire for manufacturing. So a few years later, I went off to business school and moved out to the Bay Area, as lots of people do, or at least they used to in the pre-COVID times. And I found myself again in this situation where there was I had a job offer from this little known company at the time called Tesla. And Tesla, this was back in 2013. They had just launched their Model S sedan vehicle, and they were looking to build up new factories for the Model X, and Model 3 at that time was way off into the future. So at that time I was really looking for something in the tech industry that was focused on making actual products, and there were so few things in that space back in that time that it really just seemed like this was a special industry and a really special company at that point in time. So so I started my my time at Tesla essentially as a robot buyer. I thought it was a cool enough job where I was responsible for making deals with robotic suppliers that we would eventually use to build the cars. And by the way, these aren't like iRobot, like
Will Smith.
That's the first thing that came to my mind. Like, man, he's buying robots from robots.
So a quick explainer, and something about me that I will always do is I'm a big believer in breaking things down and making them understandable for common people. So if I ever talk about something that's not understandable, please stop me. So and the way that I do this is really by thinking about, like, if I have to explain to my parents or my kids, like, how am I going to tell them what I'm doing and what I'm working on? So these robots are like industrial automation robots. So the way you think about them is they're like robotic arms. They can move from point A to point B. Most of the time, they have a tool at the end of it that you call end of arm tooling. And that end of arm tooling can do everything from grabbing to changing out a tool to do welding, to change out a tool to do riveting, and all sorts of different applications, or they call them appliances or end of arm tooling, if you will. So, I got my job at Tesla, started doing that. And, as with most companies, and one of the things I encourage people to do is to move into an industry or role or a space where you have lots of white space to expand into. And at this time, there was so much white space that I really was just charting my own course.
Yeah.
And kind of building relationships throughout the company. I got to know different engineers that were working on lots of different projects. And I made it my business to get involved in other people's business. And eventually, I was asked to take on the responsibility for our stamping facility, and then to build a new paint shop, a new general assembly line. They were talking about this factory that we wanted to build for batteries in Reno. Turns out to be like now one of the largest factories in America, the Reno Gigafactory. And I have memories of being at that place when they were literally just leveling the ground, because this factory was so large, they actually had to account for the curvature of the earth from one side of the factory to the other.
Wow.
That's crazy.
So, I mean, it was such a crazy time to be there. I got to build up the factory, but I also got to build up a very high performing and high potential team at Tesla of about 30 people. And we were responsible for, I won't say specific numbers, but it was several $1 billion worth of capital equipment. And each of those was major deal. So I can pause there because I don't know if you guys have any questions, but I'm just kind of going my career journey for the moment.
Yeah, because you definitely have a vast, background of working, from being over in Baghdad to, working with robots to now sending rockets into space, right? And then in between some of the different things you've done, from working with robots now, working with rockets, kind of saying you don't have to be a rocket scientist to launch rockets, right? I think I heard you say that on another call, but really speaking to how everyone thinks tech is just software or just platforms and social media. but understanding that whole conversation around atoms and bits, like you're working in the atoms world where you're still having stuff that have matter. Want to talk about the power of, hey, there's still always going to be hardware that's needed to innovate the things that we're doing, hundreds of years ago, but how do we innovate that and bring more software to it? But you've really carved out a space as kind of the hardware guy, and how some people have looked down on that. Can you share a little bit about that?
Oh man, absolutely. So, I'll start with my father. I'll give him a shout out, Bill Drewery Sr. As I'm telling my dad about this opportunity at Tesla. My dad was old school. Grew up in the steel mills of Pittsburgh with my 6 uncles, and but his first thought was like, why would you ever want to work in a factory? Like, I did that part of my life. You're in Silicon Valley. Why not, work in software and do something, in the virtual world? But really, I think there is so much opportunity, especially in the US, because we've gotten away from making of things that are made out of atoms. And I think that we're now having this moment of reckoning where we realize that these are all things that we need. The thing that the paradigm shift that I've seen happen over the last decade has been that there are there, in the beginning, there was like, there were hardware people and there were software people, and never in the middle they shall meet. Because people had so much fear, one side of the other, really kind of branding themselves into a corner. But one of the things that I've realized is that as we have continued to innovate on hardware and making the hardware smarter and more adaptable through the use of software, there is now this very interesting mix of hardware or software-enabled hardware products. And of course, I will use a Tesla as an example of that, as most people like to do. But I have a real experience in. I remember when I have a Model 3. It was one of my gifts to myself after working on that project, and I remember it having, was the first 100 edition of this car. And the car was really dumb when I got it. Like, the Bluetooth didn't work. There were very few enabled features on the car. There was no autopilot. But in the beginning, there was just a set of sensors and appliances in the car that were ready whenever the code was ready to be pushed over the air to the vehicle. And so I remember waking up to software updates where now all of a sudden the Bluetooth speakers work.
Wow.
And the cameras worked, and they were able to actually enhance the imaging on the cameras. One day we got a surprise update that there were heated seats in both the front and the back of the vehicle. And now you can go into the infotainment center and press a button to turn on your heated seats. So it's not like overnight, all of a sudden, the car just sprouted, new sensors and heating pads. All of these things were meticulously planned into the product development of that vehicle from day one, where people thought about how they wanted that product to progress. And they had to have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, and people who work on really physical products to be able to set the stage, or at least make an environment for that software to work, so that one day in the near, not so distant future, you could do a software push and delight your customers. So we're seeing that happen in all sorts of industries. There are lots of now, I call them software-enabled hardware products in the consumer space, in the industrial space, in factory settings. And I think we're only going to continue to see more of that as the industry progresses, and as the meeting of the minds, I'll call it, continues to happen between the people that have that software competency and the hardware capabilities.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's really interesting. The Jeremiah talks about the atoms and bits quite a bit, and how we need in the vision that it took, right, to put those features into the vehicle even before they could be activated. But then it's almost like the software had to catch up first, and then the software allowed it to go to a new level. And so now let's fast forward to what you do at Astra. Like Jeremiah said, you go from Baghdad, Iraq, to, you know, Silicon Valley with robots and electric vehicles. And now we're talking space. We're talking orbit. We're talking rockets. So tell us a little bit about what you do at Astra.
Yeah, absolutely. So
And what Astra does, I guess that's probably where we should start. What does Astra do? And then what's your role there?
Absolutely. So I'll do a bit of a walk it because there are certainly pieces in between the Tesla job and Astra where, you know, at one point I realized that I at Tesla, I really loved my job and my team there, but I really wanted to work on something that was earlier stage. So I spent some time working in a robotics startup. I spent 2 years working in the construction space, building prefabricated apartments. We finished an apartment here in Oakland that I'm very proud of, and you know, eventually I've kind of always sought out new challenges in new industries and companies that are making different types of products because for me that's the wild card. Like, what am I going to learn that's new in this role, in this company, that, you know, something that I don't know about, because I feel like in supply chain I have a certain what's the word I'm looking for? I have it's supply chain as a function. So, you know, you're bringing a certain set of skills that really doesn't change much from company to company, but the wild card continues to be what's the thing that you're building. Mm-hmm. So when I sought out this opportunity at Astra, one of the things that really captivated me was this company's vision to create the lowest cost of launch for any company that's out on the market today. And, you know, I started to ask myself, well, SpaceX exists. They're, you know, they seem to be doing a pretty good job. Why does the world need, you know, so many launch companies? And it only takes, like, you know, a little bit of market research to see that there are so many satellite companies that are building the sensors of the future and the appliances of the future, these satellites that are going to live on orbit in a constellation style format. And what I mean by a constellation is that there are hundreds or even thousands of satellites that are out on orbit that are transmitting data, not only from Earth to space and space to Earth, but also between each other. Yep. And there is much more desire for satellite companies to be on orbit than there is capability to actually get the satellites there. So there's a real desire and a real market opportunity there that Astra, I think, was more than happy to take advantage of. And so I'll kind of start my story there. So when I think about Astra and what Astra does, there are a few things, and I'll start with the launch services because that's the most visible thing that most people gravitate toward. So launch services are essentially, if you're a satellite maker, you want to have a company launch your satellite from Earth to some point in space, and you pay a fee to be a passenger on that launch. So this has lots of similarities to like the trucking industry, for example, where you have like less than truckload or LTL, where you can be like a passenger on someone else's launch. So companies like SpaceX will do a rideshare program where they might have a primary customer, and then there are lots of secondary customers. But as a secondary customer, you don't always really get to choose when you're going to launch or the place that you're going to end up in space. And I'll talk more about the places in space in a minute, because I think most people assume that there's just one place in space that's literally everywhere. But there's an opportunity for companies that want to launch on their own schedule and to be more directly launched into the place that they want to be. And the other thing that Astra does, and one of the things that we're currently doubling down on, is building space products. So really interestingly, we actually build what we call a spacecraft engine or a spacecraft thruster. And they're actually like these little engines that you strap onto the back of a satellite, and they help to propel and steer satellites through space. So it's actually a great complementary business to what we do on launch services, where you end up exactly where you want to be. If you are a satellite maker that's on a ride share and you're not going to end up in the orbit where you want to be, you use one of our space thrusters to take you from that orbit into a different orbit. So, that's really a booming business right now, and one that Astra, I think, is more than poised to take over. So, I talked a little bit about these orbits, and I think it's worth talking about that just as a quick explainer, because they're, the way that I try to break this down when I explain it to, my kids or my parents and friends that don't know anything about it, is there are first of all different altitudes.
Yeah.
So there is like geostationary orbit that's really far away from the Earth. And really, that's the orbit. If you want a satellite to sit over a certain point over the Earth, you have to launch it into far enough away from the Earth that you will be in sync in a sun synchronous orbit. So you orbit the Earth one time per day. Now, if you want to be able to provide communications coverage or hurricane tracking and imaging services, you've actually got to be much closer to the Earth in what we call low Earth orbit, or LEO, as you might hear this term. And really, that's like, it might sound far, but it's only 500 kilometers from the Earth. And 500 kilometers, to give you context, is like if you were 500 kilometers away from Los Angeles, as we are in San Francisco, if you were driving, it would like take you like 5 hours to get there. So it's not that far away from the Earth. And the second aspect of it is an inclination. So for some use cases, you might want to be orbiting the Earth around the equator, and that's what we call an equatorial orbit. So if you're going to be tracking tropical storms, for example, that's the perfect place to be, because that's where the tropical storms are happening. And you would launch a constellation of satellites that are in kind of linear, going around the equator of the Earth. And by contrast, or the other extreme of that, is you have a polar orbit, where the launch location would actually be very different from an equatorial orbit, where you would want to launch close to the equator. And for a polar orbit, you would want to launch from a place like Alaska or the South Pole, because it's more directly going to get you into an orbit that goes over the North Pole and the South Pole of the Earth like every 90 minutes. So that's my quick explainer. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. I was over here pulling up notes from the last time that you spoke, and I heard you listening, and I remember you guys were talking about polar orbit and the equator orbit and all that, and how far you got to be out, and knowing that people do that for different reasons. Like you said, maybe they want GPS, right? That's really big for tracking, obviously with our phones and all that. But geospacing, kind of seeing how far things out. The different type of reasons why someone would want to pay to get that data from certain companies. And most people think it's just, going to space is going to Mars, right? Going to live in Mars one day, or going to the moon, or people going with SpaceX and all these different people, or humans taking travel. But it's not that at all, right? It's actually, really helping improve our lives here on Earth with the data that we're collecting from all that information, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a huge opportunity in the space tech industry. I mean, most economists place it somewhere around $1 trillion industry over the next decade. And, I would say the overwhelming majority of that value proposition is focused on space services that are targeted toward Earth. So enhancing communications, providing, using satellite constellations, building space products, providing launch services, all those things I think account for the majority of it. And you certainly have some things that are really far out that sound like a sci-fi movie, but that are actually becoming more of a reality. Things like mining precious metals out of asteroids and things like that. There just might be a value proposition out there for it. I have yet to be convinced on that. But
well, the movie Get Out, that's what the whole show is about. The movie was like getting them, like, let it hit us so we can get all the precious metals out of this. Like, no, let's not do that. But just thinking about all the precious and the rare earth metals, right? That we are starting to possibly lose. We don't have access to them. So it's important that, because we need that to build that technology out into the future. So I would love to hear a little bit more about, you don't necessarily have to have a tech background to get into tech. I know there's so many jobs inside of, just Astra that obviously people are looking for, or in the tech space, where you don't have to have an engineering background. You don't have to, be a sophisticated person, like you said, you're not a rocket scientist, but you're still launching rockets into space. So it maybe help some of the viewers that maybe not be looking to go start their own venture, but may want to break into the tech world and how they can use some of their unique insights from the industries they were a part of to come on board and support some of these massive companies that are really disrupting the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still consider it somewhat of a miracle that I've gotten to work on some of the things that I've done. But I will say, you by no means have to be a rocket scientist to get into the aerospace industry. And there's so many opportunities for people that just have a really sound mind, very good business instincts, project management instincts. And there are just lots of things that you will learn along the way. And if you're able to, to capture those learnings, there's a lot of value that you can bring to a place like Astra, for example. I mean, I think back to my early career when I was doing consulting for the government back in Washington, D.C., and my boss had me building flowcharts. So flowcharts are essentially like a process map that tells you you're going to start a payments process at this end, and you're going to end up with the final payment being processed at this end, and figuring out all of the steps that need to happen in between. And it was kind of like the Karate Kid, where you're going through all these motions and you have no idea what you're going to use this for in the future. Really not doing it, not even with the future in mind.
Yeah.
But that is an example for me of one of those skills that I've used very frequently throughout my career and continue to use to this day, where you start with some very basic principles, like every process has to have an input and an output. It has to have a process owner, and you have to account for every step along the way. So just thinking through things like that, that's kind of been one of those things that's enabled me to really understand business processes and how really complex products get built from very simple parts.
Yep.
There are, I mean, lots of other opportunities. If you have a talent and a knack for selling, just understanding the sales process and identifying the drivers for customers, that's of real interest to companies in the tech industry. If you are a product manager and maybe you have an understanding of how different processes are supposed to work, but you don't necessarily know those processes, that's okay. Like, you don't need to know everything about just building a rocket to be someone of value to a company like that.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things you're just saying, and I couldn't help but think of early in my career. I remember like working on a deal, whether it was with a customer, whether it was with another buyer, it was a B2B relationship or a B2C relationship. I learned really quickly setting the expectations mattered so much, and then defining deliverables. And now when I'm in whatever contract we're negotiating, whatever company we're working with, it's always like, hey, what are the expectations and what are the deliverables? And I use that 20 years into my career, but it was like one of those wax on, wax off experiences where it was like, hey, like, get really, really clear of what this person expects of me, and get really, really clear of what I am promising. And when we mentor young business people or young people in their careers, like, hey, have that early conversation with the boss. But yeah, those little what we call them, the trail, it's like leaving the trail of your experience and how that helps you into today, and how many transferable skills from industry to industry, or experience to experience, of where you can carry to where you are today, and what you're working on. So I want to go into some of your experiences and some of the people you've worked with, and some of the different leadership styles and things like that. But you have had, if people haven't really caught it, you've had such a unique experience being a part of really dynamic teams. Never saying, hey, I'm going to start this company and I have this vision. It's like, hey, you're attaching your skills to someone else with a vision. Talk to us a little bit about you being self-aware enough to know exactly what you bring as a deliverable for someone else's vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've worked for lots of very interesting people. The first that comes to mind would be Elon Musk.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask me, oh, have you ever met Elon in person? And I'm like, I've had more in-person meetings than you might expect.
Yeah.
Spending a lot of money for the company, I had an opportunity to really get to understand the way he thinks, and breaks things down into first principles. And so, um, one of the things that I really appreciate about Elon is that he does go back to the fundamentals and the basics of why something works, why something, and maybe even why something should work, even if we're not able to do it today, or we don't have the technology to do it. In principle, there are a lot of things that are possible that we just don't know how to do yet.
Yep.
And Elon is someone that sees directly through those barriers as if they're not even there.
Mm.
And so he would ask us to do things that, just weren't, we thought didn't make sense at the time. And, just playing that through, and with the benefit now of having hindsight, and seeing some of the choices that we made in terms of, insourcing and having a vertically integrated, battery production line and automotive line that really defied conventional thinking, was very, very insightful. The foresight to build our own software systems to enable the production of our cars in the way that we wanted to do it, was another thing that was very insightful. Doubling down on this direct to consumer model where, Tesla does not go through dealerships to sell to their customers, was something that was very insightful. And all of those things, I think, have helped contribute to the way I think about the world, and the way I think about what's possible and what's not. I'll say my current CEO, Chris Kemp, is very similar in that way. Very charismatic, but also very, very detail oriented in thinking about the way that we build the rocket, thinking clear through our barriers into the future, about not what the world needs today, but what the world is going to need, 3 years and 5 years in the future, if we continue to go down the path that we're on, and how we can really be enablers for future technology, where, really, I'll tie this all back at the space industry back to the beginning of our conversation, where we talked about the meeting of atoms and bits.
Mhm.
There is a lot of information that service providers want to be able to provide to customers in terms of, communication services and, mapping and imaging and things like that they just can't provide today because they don't have the eye in the sky that they would need to do that. And so really the satellites themselves, they are a technological feat unto themselves. It takes, real insight to be able to make a high-tech device that is radiation hardened, that can operate in a vacuum of space and communicate with nodes back down on Earth. I mean, that's a feat unto itself, but it's really the services and the things that are going to be built on that is what I think makes up the majority of that $1 trillion industry that we talked about. And that's like one of those things that I see in Chris Kemp and my current leadership team there. So, when I think about the value proposition that I bring, I actually maybe haven't really done a great job of explaining what I even do in supply chain. So, maybe I'll start there. When you want to build a hardware product, most people think about just the doing part. So the actual making and fabricating and assembling of a vehicle. But one of the things they don't realize is that there are lots of things that have to happen in order for that process to be complete. And it starts with a planning person. So from the time you book a customer for that product, you have to have someone that is scheduling the demand, or scheduling against that demand, and thinking about, all right, when does that product need to be completed? What's our manufacturing time? What are the lead times for all the parts and components that go into it? There's a purchasing and sourcing aspect to supply chain, And it's not just a simple like, oh, I'm going to go out and buy a bunch of stuff and, on credit cards or on credit lines. It's really a methodical thinking about, I need to buy this thing. I'm going to need it by this date. It needs to meet these quality standards. And, that's just the beginning. Once you start to get into making hundreds of thousands or millions of something, you start running up against constraints that you might not have even realized were there when you were a small fish. So now you have companies like Apple and Tesla that use the entire world's supply of some of the things that they make. And so when you think about like, building a company that's based on lithium ion battery technology, but you're already the number one consumer of lithium ion batteries in the world, you got to do something about that. And that really is where it comes down to strategic supply chain planning and thinking about how you are going to industrialize an industry that exists or create an industry that doesn't exist. And that's a really strategic part of what I believe is a world-class supply chain organization. And then the last bit of this is there's all the flow and the movement of parts throughout that supply chain. So from the time you source something or buy it from a supplier, whether they're domestic or maybe they're foreign, getting those parts, on a ship and bringing them in through a port that needs to be cleared through customs into your factory, warehoused, kitted, distributed out to the manufacturing floor is a feat unto itself. And then thinking about outbound logistics and something like what I do, we have finished rockets that have hazardous materials and other things on board. And you need to think about how you're going to get that from a rocket factory in Alameda, California, to a launch site in Kodiak, Alaska, or in Cape Canaveral, Florida. So that last piece of it also is like why I think about how my job doesn't end until we hand it off to the end consumer that's actually going to use that product. So there aren't, there are, I would say there are lots of people in the world that maybe know parts of that. And, that's really where I think the world needs more supply chain professionals. And, part of the value that I think I bring is not only an understanding of that, but also thinking about the team that you need and the skills that you need to have on your team in order to make all of that happen. So, I'm happy to talk more about this part of it, but I'll say that the thing I'm most proud of in my career is the teams that I've been able to build at companies like Tesla and Astra, where, I'm bringing people that are like light years ahead of me in terms of their specific skills in an area to actually make all of that stuff happen.
Wow. Yeah, I think the underrated skill sometimes is the people management of a specific project and how to assemble the right team. You talked about how your role as a founding member or as an early team member to build a team, to build a product or a vision, or to see something, these walls that didn't exist. You talked about with the two CEOs that you named. Is that level of thinking, when you talked about Elon, you talked about Chris, is that level of thinking, is that a nature or is that a nurture? Is that something that someone is innately gifted with, or is that something you can train? So, and I asked that question because, I'm raising kids. I have 3 sons. And I think there's some of our viewers that are, that maybe they're in college or they're early in their career, or maybe they're entrepreneurs and they think like, how does Elon run, from PayPal to Tesla to SpaceX, and then go from thing to thing to create something that wasn't there before, to be able to look into that future. So you being around that kind of thinking, was that natural for you? Is that something you've trained yourself to do? And is that something you can acquire, or is it just like, hey, God, I can't put in what God left out, right? So like, can you talk to a little bit about that thinking and not having those barriers? And you said something of like, there's a lot of things that are possible. We just don't know how to do them yet. And that really stood out to me, and that thinking for a new entrepreneur, college student, raising children. Can you develop that level of thinking?
I have strong thoughts on this. I believe that you can. So first, to just answer your question directly, I believe that you can totally train yourself and teach others to do that. It takes, some heavy involvement on their parts to be able to do it. But one of the things that I really appreciate about the entrepreneurs and professionals that you and Jeremiah highlight are that they come from unexpected backgrounds.
Mhm.
So just a little bit more about myself. I've been really talked about early childhood, but when I think about myself, like I'm a kid that grew up in the projects. Like I was actually, my family did not have the resources to put me in the space camp. I used to watch Nickelodeon and watch these kids going off to space camp. I was like, I want to be one of those kids that does that. And I think that there are certain people who are born with the ability to see through barriers, or maybe they've experienced it so early in their lifetime that they don't even realize they've overcome that at a very early age. I'll say for myself, it took me being around other people that thought that way to kind of push me to do to think in a similar way. And I will also say that it comes from exercising a muscle that most people don't even know they have, and that muscle is constantly, voluntarily pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and not just doing something that you're comfortable with, not just doing the thing that you know again and again, but really thinking about like, what am I going to learn, or what do I really want to learn out of this experience, or what do I want to do in the long run? And I think it's just taken me a few years of living outside the country and working in a conflict zone, moving to Silicon Valley with no family or support out here, trying new things, and really just being thrown in the deep end so many times that you can swim. It's just a matter of time before you pick it up, and hopefully before you go under the water. So I think that actually absolutely can be developed. I have young kids as well. I've seen pictures of your beautiful kids. I've got a 4-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old son. And I'm always talking to them about the stuff that I'm doing and the stuff that I work on. My son likes to say that he went viral. I had a clip of me and my son talking. We got like 200 likes.
That's a lot for you.
That's great.
I have a clip of my son though, and we're just talking about orbital dynamics and why a satellite needs to go to a certain speed in order to go into orbit. And he's 6 and he picks this stuff up, and he thinks it's normal. And I want for him to think that it's normal. I think that sometimes we as parents have a tendency to underestimate what we believe is our kids' mental capacity, and it's part of our job to push them out of their comfort zone early and often so that they can develop that muscle early on in life. And especially as underrepresented minorities, that's something that we are not always trained to do because the risk of failure is perceived as being so high most of the time.
Yeah, and I was, definitely want to ask into that question about, obviously being a Black man that is in a space where you don't see a lot of our faces, right? It's hard to be in those places we don't see our faces. And you mentioned being young and wanting to get into the science world. I remember myself too. Like if I go back, if my mom was being interviewed right now, she'll tell you I had a big, dreams and aspirations for space when I was young. I was just so drawn to it. I remember one Christmas I got this space kit and I screamed like a little girl when I opened up the bag, whatever that means, screaming like a girl, right? I was so excited. And in that, over time, just not having the access to some of those programs, I think just that drive went away. So maybe, talk about, coming from an underrepresented group, that not having access to opportunities and connections to create that pipeline so that we can create more of us to be seen into these areas. And more people do need to hear about your story. That's why we want to, put your information out to the world, because we need you to go viral so young men and women that look like us, that come from backgrounds like us, can see that, hey, if he did it, I can too, because he didn't have all the access either. He didn't come from money, but he was able to find his way. And some of that is a little bit of luck of some things you've been introduced to, but at the same time, you brought that grit, that tenacity, that hard work to come in behind that. And now you're literally on the front line of future. That's what I say, working in the tech space, obviously you being in the frontier market, literally on the frontier. but in an emerging market that's being developed. And, once again, being a Black male, not seeing yourself in a lot of meetings, not seeing yourself in a lot of rooms or even people you're communicating with. I mean, how do you take on and bear that cross and push that rock up the hill, knowing that what you represent is not just Will and your family, like you're representing the whole collective, like the dynasty in a way.
It's a huge responsibility. I mean, it's something that I know I take seriously. And I know you guys, from the work that you do in the nonprofit space, how seriously you take it. There are lots of people out there rooting for our success. Lots of kids don't maybe know it until they have the exposure or know that those resources are available. I'll say the first thing is, just the free world access that's opened up to us through reading. My parents got us introduced to reading at a very early age, and we were always thinking about, what can you learn from this? Research that's available. YouTube, I think, is one of the and I need to be careful because I know my son would be like, "You never let me watch YouTube."
Right. Yeah.
Gotta be careful too there, right? But YouTube University, right? YouTube University or TikTok University.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a great tool when you use it the right way.
It is a great tool if it's used the right way. I mean, there's so many things that you can learn how to do, tutorials on how to use software, tutorials on how to build, bottle rockets and model rockets and things like that. I learned about, battery pump and turbo pump engines and all that stuff just watching YouTube videos about it. And that's one of the things that's enabled me to have an intelligent conversation with our head of propulsion at my company about, what type of engine we want to put on our next rocket. Those things are available to us first. And I'd say definitely focus on the things that are free, the things that you have access to. If you have interest in something, really just using that and to the best of your ability. The second thing I will say is seek out advocates and the people that want to see you be successful. I've had so many nonprofit programs that have fed my development. So Jeremiah mentioned Old School Cafe is like one of the nonprofits that I've supported over the years here in the Bay Area. But organizations like MLT, Management Leadership for Tomorrow. I was one of the earlier fellows in their program back in 2008 when I was applying to business school. And when I tell you the leader of that organization, his name is John Rice. He's a basketball player and is taking the same approach that pro athletes take to their professions into the corporate world. This man is a clairvoyant also. I mean, he's seen things far into the future that we never would have imagined back in 2008. And now just seeing the way things have progressed and how they've been supporters and advocates of making intros to high profile individuals, just building a network of other professionals that are at the same stage, and we can share in each other's struggles. Because when you are the only brown face in a room day after day, it does wear on you. And there, you need a support network to be able to talk about issues that you deal with and things that come up. And, that's just like, those are a few of the things that I think are enablers that are at our disposal that a lot of people just might not realize are there.
Yeah, we had someone on the pod earlier, and he'll drop, and he used the Arthur Ashe quote of, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Right. At the end of the day, like there's the technology and the access to democratization, through these different platforms from Instagram, TikTok University, YouTube, you can plug in and learn so much. But when we were coming up, we didn't have a lot of those things in these, the past generation before us. So now this new generation, they do have, a lot of information. But once again, how to navigate and find the right information is going to help you go to get to where you want to be and plug into that network.
That's right. I guess we usually say let's land this plane, but let's land this rocket. I would love share a little bit. You've been around, you've been inspired by some great entrepreneurs. You got to work for them, alongside them. Ever had the itch yourself?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I certainly, during my time working in early stage startups, have just been thinking about like what is it that I'm meant to learn from where I'm at. I've built and launched 5 rockets and built 2 factories and apartment buildings and plethora number of great teams. I certainly have thought about starting something of my own. Um, not quite ready to. I'm not quite ready to talk in specifics about what that thing is. I think we'll have to save that for season 3 of
Mhm.
Underestimated podcast.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I'm finding myself really involved in these days, even outside of my I won't call it a 9 to 5 because it's not that, outside of my day job, is I've gotten involved in board work. So essentially, most people think that the CEO is the highest person in their organization. It's actually not true. It's the chairman and the board of directors that helps to lead the company and to provide like an oversight and governance there. And so, I'm actually working on a few different things. So I currently sit on the board of a company, venture-backed startup called Mitra Chem. And Mitra is building lithium iron cathode batteries for the EV market. We're there. One of the things that we realized, and I kind of touched on it earlier, is that the world is now transitioning from internal combustion engines to renewable energy and electrified electric vehicles. And so one of the major blockers today, and what we believe will be a major enabler of that, in not only providing more access to materials, but also lowering the cost of those materials, is going to be a critical thing as we continue to go down that road. And so, one of the things that I love about this is that it's providing me with another opportunity to learn about a new industry and a new space, how something is made, but also to help other entrepreneurs as they are going along in their journey. And that's one of the things that's given me a lot of life. So yeah, I think the world has yet to see what Will Drewery does for as far as entrepreneurial ventures, but yeah, I think I'm in a good place and really just enjoying everything that there is to learn from where I'm currently sitting.
Yeah, and you speak to like the future of where we're heading in this EV world. Obviously, there's things obviously like the vehicle, but people forget there's other things that still use gas, like your lawnmower, right? Things like that, the weed whacker, trucks, and eventually airplanes. Like there's so much that has to be innovated to be more cost efficient, and obviously for climate, pledges, for climate pledge, you see people are doing. And you really see the hardware side of it. Once again, these are still hardware products. Do you think growing up in the Pittsburgh area, Steel City, the manufacturing kind of played a part? You kind of being the hardware guy, that kind of spoke out to me earlier when you were talking about being from Pittsburgh and that industrial vibe, just that city that was built, in America. And you talk about America shifting, coming back and trying to bring more of the manufacturing here. You see that huge opportunity for jobs for people. Obviously, going to be different type of manufacturing because we use software and machines to kind of help with building. But we're going to have to rescale up as Americans to bring more of this work back to the nation. Do you think that played a part in you growing up in Steel City? Being in the hardware space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of us, I think, are fueled by the earliest memories that we have. Just being kids where we grew up. And I'll say, for me, I have like this I'll call it like a visceral feeling when I talk about hardware products. There's just a very intuitive way that I see things as they need to be built and as they need to be moved. So for me, I think that that's one of the gifts that I've been fortunate to capture from my childhood, to kind of bring to into the future, into all of the new ventures that I've been a part of. But then I've also really been thinking about this intersection between hardware and software, and how they've been so polarized that there are very few people. And like in the beginning, now we started to see software people moving more toward the hardware world. I think there's actually the next generation of entrepreneurs are going to be hardware people that move into the software world. People that are really thinking about the platforms that need to be built. I think the best customers and product designers are going to be the people who have had to deal with the pain of dealing with issues on the assembly line, dealing with issues in their supply chain and moving things. Because they're really the ones that drive the requirements for the software that needs to be built. So and most of them, or I'll speak for myself, many of them have this feeling that because they don't know how to code, that they have nothing to contribute to that world. And I would say that's like the truth could not be further from that. I think that there's going to be a whole new era of products that are built to help manipulate the way we think about the world. So yeah, we'll see, man. I think there's going to be a huge opportunity there.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more, man. So thank you, Will. We appreciate you sharing your time with us, sharing your experience, your wisdom. So we really appreciate you hanging out with us, man. Tell us real quick, where can people find you? What's the best way to, if they want to reach out to Will, what's the best way to reach you?
Oh man, I would say I'm most active on LinkedIn. I'm like constantly using that for recruiting and connecting with people. So look me up on LinkedIn, Will Drewery. It's my LinkedIn handle. And I'd be happy to meet up with anyone who's interested in hearing me talk.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you, Will. Thank you to all of our listeners who enjoyed this episode. If you like this episode, go ahead and like and subscribe, share it with a friend or a family member. Thank you to our sponsors who make all this work possible. Thank you, guys.